Philadelphia. I'm Dr. Gloria L, Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. I am delighted to have the two gentlemen with me in the studio that I have here today. One of them was my colleague many years ago. His name, I love to say your name. His name is Olasupo Laosebikan. I love your name. And he is author of a book called Life is God, Notes on the Psychology of Human Adjustment. And then I have my adopted son, not in a formal sense, but because we belong together as mother and son, Wayne Sebamurti and Dr, who is author of The Nature of Intelligence, among other books. But today we want to talk about African spirituality, and I've called this show Reflections on African Spirituality. This is a very important matter to me because I think that we ought to know from whence we came. I think we ought to know something about the spiritual ideas that our people had that sustained them for millions of years before we got to the point at which we encountered the African captive trade and all of the challenges that we have faced over the last several hundred years. But, you know, to presume that because Africans did not practice a denomination, that they had no spiritual ideas, that they thought of nothing beyond the mundane material world, is to misunderstand Africans just totally and completely. So I've asked you to come and to share with me what you will of the spiritual ideas upon which the original human beings, the first human beings, based their relationships with what one would call the Most High or God, and their relationships with each other. The bases, the principles that guided their behavior and their beliefs. Now that's a tall order. Who wants to give an opening?
Well, one of the good things about being here is an opportunity to talk together and learn together. This morning I was doing what I would think of as a spiritual practice, which is a meditation in a park, you know. And I met a man who asked me, where are you from? And I said, from God, you know. But he meant it in a geographical sense, so I said, well, I am from Africa. When I think about it, it gave me a good way of discussing this topic, because when we talk about African spiritual practice, to me, it's not just the geographical Africa that we're talking about. Africa as the home of humankind, as a beginning. If one thinks of it like that, Africa as a source. That source, which is life, is also who we are. We are it. So, and whoever has life, there's a challenge to try to understand what it is. So, from time immemorial, people have always been engaged in trying to decipher their own existence and make sense of it. So to me, this is what I think of as African spirituality, is the reflection on the source of oneself. That source is old and is very present, because here I am. It's always a reflection on life and the mystery of it. I think that's a good
very good opening statement, Sebamurti.
Yes, it's a very big topic, because African spirituality encompasses so much depth. In fact, the whole world owes all of what has been learned in all the spiritual traditions across the world to Africa, the birthplace of humanity, civilization, culture, and the spiritual ideas that are flourishing under many different guises across the various cultures. But it's interesting too how African spirituality and the name that is used to refer to the Most High in Kemetic terms is Neter. And Neter is the Kemetic term where we get nature from. And one of the things you'll find out is that one of the great teachers of spirituality with African people was nature. That a lot of the symbols that were used to help guide the mind into a higher understanding of the transcendental reality that informs the whole universe, symbolic forms in nature were used, and words that represent things that's beyond the mundane. So African spirituality is very broad, and it covers more than just the geography of the earth. It covers the whole of creation and that which was before creation, which is where African people began in talking about spirituality, the unmanifest, that no thing from which everything came into being. So to talk about African spirituality and reflect on it in perspectives from an African mind takes us all the way back to the source. And just as the gentleman said here, how he referenced where he's from, God, the source, no separation. That's who I am. I'm not from the land, although this physical body may have been birthed in the land, but who I am that you are speaking to, the source, God, is where I reference from. And this is where African people start from when they speak of spirituality. They start from that source, and then they move out from there.
That is the striking difference that I find between spirituality and religion. This thing about geography, which I'm glad you brought up very early on, you know, the geography of God. God is in heaven. You know, the devil is in hell. The God is external. The God is distant. You know, God is somewhere. Sometime you, if you are well behaved, you will get to go to where God is in a place, and you will go where God is. Or God may come to you, you know. The whole notion of the separation between the human being and the divine being by some geographical arrangement is, to me, that's the precise difference between Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all of the organized religions always externalize God and give God a residence that is outside. And the African understands omnipresence probably better than anybody, understanding that omnipresence means present here.
Yes,
also.
definitely.
Go ahead.
Definitely. If we took more responsibility, if we accepted that, and then we would take more responsibility for the way the world is. Because if God created the world, we have recreated it in so many ways. We are the ones who are going to war. God is not to blame for that. We are the ones who are doing so many things. It's not surprising that our wish, whatever we wish, many things we wish are manifest, because we have the nature of God. I mean, we cannot help it. So God is not something very distant from us. God is as near as our very heartbeat, and is as untouchable as it is as near as we are. So the real challenge is to accept that the world we have is the one that we have created. If God created it, we've recreated it. We are recreating it every minute. God did not make atomic bomb. He didn't make the internet. He didn't. I mean, we are the ones who. So if we were to take more responsibility, we will be in a very different place. One other thing I'd like to say was your comment about the so-called revealed religion. You know, the revealed religions, the ones that depend on revelation that God has revealed. You know, there's a text. The difference between African religious practices is that you don't find African religious practices an attempt to convince somebody to accept the African traditional religion. It doesn't proselytize. It doesn't try to win souls, because there's nothing to win. I mean, we just are. There's nothing to. There's no God that will.
You taking the lost too.
Yes, there's no God that is pleased just because of something you do. I mean, look at the ego of it. I mean, where will God require you? You know, you just you could be felled by a mosquito, and now God will now require you to go and bring other people to. God could do it if God wanted that to happen. Then
God is omnipotent.
Yes, where would
and
he,
can therefore cause that to happen.
You know, it's really amazing that you know what divides us is always ego. Is the ego that divides us. What has the world at each other's throat is ego. Is the sense that I have the truth, and the rejection of mystery, the rejection of the fact that it's a mystery and we're part of it. You know, we will never really know, and we know. You know, both of them together.
Yeah,
exactly. We do know, and to accept that it's a mystery.
Right, and you definitely hit right on the root problem, which is grounded in ignorance. The fact that the ego, this false sense of self that we have become misidentified with and operating out of, which dichotomizes and separates and objectifies everything that makes up our experience. And so then it becomes easy for us now to wage war, because there's an other that we see that's separate and opposed to us. There's an enemy that has been created out of this mindset that is ego-based, not from the consciousness that knows itself to be in one and in harmony with God and with nature, but this ego consciousness that has separated itself and said, you are other, you are separate from me, and so I got to be in competition with you. You know, I can't see you as myself. I am because we are, therefore I am. It's I think, therefore I am, and so I'm connected to my thought and my image of me, and you are a thinking person that's connected to your image, and I see you through my image, but we're not really seeing each other in our authentic self for who we really are, because of this ego base that has been constructed. It's a social construct that has come out of many different factors, but not out of the natural nature that exists in reality. It comes from what we have thought about what we see, which again comes from a mindset that gets shaped and formed through a process that is not culturally grounded in what reality is. And African people, which produce thousands of volumes of literature, which is evidence from the ravages of ancient Egypt and the housing of all of our literature in all of these museums around the world, systematic study of nature, and coming to know that in studying the nature and the laws of nature, that you're studying also your nature, which reaches out across the whole universe, not just the geographical area of where you live, and just limiting your understanding to that. There was a way of seeing that was insightful, that help to evoke from you that natural intelligence, which is able to make intelligible all the operations of the whole universe.
But I wanted to go into one thing, especially. I am because you are, and because you are, therefore I am. John S. M. Beatty gave us that one in African Religions and Philosophy. Just recently, Troy Davis was executed, and they had made, there were people who had made T-shirts saying, "I am Troy Davis."
Yes.
That was a level of consciousness that had not been seen, that people understood, not there but for the grace of God, but there go I.
Right.
No exceptions. Troy Davis is I. What has happened to Troy Davis has happened to me.
Yes.
And when they marched, the New Yorkers marched on Wall Street, and the police brutalized them and arrested about 80 people because they were marching. But they were not just marching, they were marching with a consciousness that said, we recognize our unity, we recognize our oneness. And so to not only to recognize your oneness with the divine, but to recognize your oneness with all other sentient beings
Yes.
is
Yes.
vital to your survival.
It is.
Because you cannot do it as an individual, even if you want to.
Definitely, but that recognition is interesting. A Kemetic term, ma'at, is also in line with the reflection of African spirituality, because it was the path of ma'at that everything was built out of, the way of life. And there's a form of ma'at called sa ma'at, which is the recognition of ma'at. In seeing and recognizing that I am because you are, and you are because I am, that is that recognition of the ma'at principle, which holds up the whole universe. And this is something that we're never divorced from, and our minds have become redefined in a way to not give it attention. And so we highlight other things that leads to our destruction, but every now and then something happens which causes this to be resurrected, and we can see that this is not a homicide, this is suicide, what's going on here with the killing of this person. A similar thing happened when the Crips and the Bloods formed a truce after the Rodney King beating, because they saw that black man being beat like that, and they identified ethnically with the blackness, and they said, you know, we're killing each other. This black on black crime, violence that we're perpetrating is really a form of suicide. No, we're going to stop this, and we're going to form a truce. And this is an actuality. They formed a truce through the reemergence of that sin and that sa ma'at, and recognizing that ma'at, that I am because you are, and you are because I am. But eventually, of course, that truce, they came back into war with each other because of the involvement of the police and the CIA.
Outside forces.
Which started making it, you know, it's a long story, but certain things brought them back into conflict with each other outside of that inner sin that revealed to them that I am you and you am I.
It's a very difficult thing to achieve. That understanding is very, very difficult in the West and in much of the world now, because individualism is so pervasive, and it's the way school is organized. You know, your grade is about you. You are not supposed to share your knowledge. You can't show people your paper. It's all about you. So school has this way of emphasizing
competition.
Exactly. That is that's the hidden curricula of the school. It's about you, and at the end of it, it's very difficult to not come out with very selfish, very self-centered the religions of the West also encourage that you're going to go to heaven. You will be saved. You know, it's not like you are charged to help. I mean, to work together with other people, but it's just about you. You will now escape hell, and you will just go to heaven. So it's quite a challenge. But all one has to think about is the fact that yes, I am contained in a body, but it's just because I have life, which you have. Without it, there's nothing. So I have whatever makes me feel like I am an individual is also what I have in common with everybody. And indeed, if that is gone, all that is left is a bag of bones. So what is this individuality? I have to realize that it is life that makes it possible. And I have to respect all the other things that have life because they're just like me. They are me. I too, I am Troy Davis. You know, they're just like me. And this understanding, I think, only comes after one has tried the Western way. For me, it came to me. Although I was born in Africa, you go to school and you are educated in another reality entirely. It came to me after I have tried the Western way, been schooled in the Western understanding, and was very unhappy as a result of it. And now I started looking and searching for an understanding. And one day it came. One day when I was very open, after I had given up, I saw very clearly that, yes, everything is alive. Everything. There's the principle of the source is present in all things. Even the stone is alive. Even the stone is asking questions about existence. Everything is part of everything. It's all one. And therefore our welfare is very dependent on the welfare of our neighbor. You could be walking down the street, and if somebody who's unhappy, they can stick a gun in your face. So if you're passing by, I heard you saying something about homeless, that we don't see them. It's to our discredit that we don't, because whatever is happening to that other person can touch you, you know. So it's just sensible. It's not moral or anything. It's just good sense to be to be aware of our neighbors' concerns and worries, and to worry with them, you know, when they are worried. Yes, that's all.
And not to derive so much pleasure out of your ability to escape the fate of people. You know, people are experiencing loss of employment, loss of homes, loss of family, you know, all kinds of things are happening to people. And, you know, there's a great tendency among some people to try to find the blame, to find the fault in the person. You know, had they not done this or that, they would still be employed, or they would still have the house, or they would still have the mate, or, you know, it's some flaw in this person that led him to this fate. And when you see it happening to millions of people, then that means that the human race has to be grossly flawed, because now this isn't just an occasional case, an occasional example. This is widespread. It's nationwide. It's international, you know. So what does that say? That says that those people who are suffering are you. They are there now. You haven't gotten there yet. But if you sit idly by, yes, and fail to address the suffering that is in your midst, yes, then you are bound to experience some of that suffering yourself sooner or later.
I think even more, if you cannot feel your neighbor, then you are dead.
Okay.
So you are paying a price for your lack of sensitivity. If you cannot feel, I mean, what is there? You know, so if you could sit on a lot of money while you hear children crying themselves to sleep, well, then you're already dead. So it's in the interest, it's in our interest to want to awaken the life in us, the sympathy that comes from knowing that we are alike, and therefore the risk that one pays if one does not feel for one's neighbor is to be dead on your feet, you know. And unfortunately, I think that's the fate. That's one of the problems in the world.
Well, people worry about physical death more than they do about the emotional and mental death, that you can actually be walking around a zombie, as you say, unfeeling.
You know, if you cannot feel your neighbor, you cannot feel that, then you are a corpse awaiting burial ceremony, you know, although one is on 2 feet.
And that, as you said earlier about the Western system of education, see, that produces this type of desensitized mind, because there's an off balance. There's no ma'at in the teaching pedagogy in the schools. The cognitive, superficial, intellectual abilities is what's being emphasized, which drives you to be competitive and see things separatively and disconnect you from the affective and the feeling, so that you can feel and empathize. We're really miseducated through processes which develop those type of conditions. And the interesting thing about African pedagogy as related to the learning experience and the whole education process, there's no divorce between spirituality and education, because what is being educed is your spiritual beingness, the awareness of yourself as a spiritual being. And this is not being made contact with by people who are subjected to a Western education, because that system of education is more about putting information in your head, really to prepare you to take your role in society, to help become a part of this machine, to help produce money, for the capitalist society that we live in. So that's the true function of a Western education. But African education is interested in educing your humanity and your spirituality, which sees you not as a disconnected being. The oneness of things is always right before your eyes. And then you learn from everything. And you lead from your heart, the heart mind, not the driven intellectual mind, but the heart mind, which will have you empathize and see that what you're doing to another, you are definitely doing to yourself.
You know, I was thinking as you spoke, I was reminded as you spoke that because of the conditioning, which people like to call education, which I refuse to call it education, the schooling, the training, because of the conditioning that our children experience, they are out of their minds, out of their right minds, out of their human minds. And so they're operating on a false set of data. They're operating on a false program that prevents them, that interferes with their ability to connect. And I'm thinking that, you know, it's a disorder. It's a real disorder, which proliferates, which just daily it proliferates. It's just more and more of our children are out of their minds, which is another way of saying mentally unbalanced. And we are also. And here we are all geographically together. If in no other way, we are here geographically together.
Yes.
And we are trying to manage to be in relationships when we are not in control of our thinking, of the way that we ought to think. We're not in control of that. So we have all of this disorder. We have, as you say, we're killing us.
Yes.
We're killing us. We're abusing us. We're disrespecting us. We're neglecting us. We're not caring for us because we don't not recognizing us.
Right.
We don't realize us. The usness is being diluted, and finally it's just being washed out. And so what is left is something. How long can a community continue to be eroded like that, Shupo?
Yeah.
To be reduced like that before it expires? How long can dead people walk around before they lie down and assume the posture of the truly dead? Because this is, I said, how we're all trying to manage without having the presence of mind to manage.
Right, and that can never be accomplished without culture. Because just as economics is a way of organizing the principle of the ecology, which economics come from ecology, and politics, in not just Western politics, but politics as a way of organizing the principle of society, your sociology, it is culture that organizes your psychology. Our psychology is disorganized because we're disconnected from our culture. We're not in our right mind, and we're not thinking and seeing and building communities in relation one with the other because we're not seeing ourselves culturally, ethnic wise. We don't see that culture is the glue that holds the people together. And this is why when we were brought into captivity, they knew that the first thing they had to do is to prevent us from practicing our culture, our traditions, our customs, help to erase any kind of memory down through the generations of what our culture was, because after so many generations removed from your indigenous land and from your practicing of your culture, now you're going to see yourself in this dead void, disconnected. So now you can be used as an empty vessel to serve the will of others, which is what happened through the institution of slavery. So we're still suffering from that because we're still under assault in many different ways, but we still have an enslaved mindset. Physically, we're somewhat still enslaved too because we really don't have no land, no way of producing for ourselves. But mentally, we can't produce on the mental level also because it's enslaved and disconnected from the culture, which is the managing principle of your psychology. All people who have ever moved across the globe have taken with them remnants of their culture, their tradition, their history. And you will see that except with African people and the descent of slaves, because that was taken from us. And we live and we move and we try to establish a relationship thinking that we can do this without being centered in our culture, which is a way of life.
Which is the embodiment of our values.
Right.
So you have various and sundry values. You have some values that come from over there, and you have some values that come over here. You have some pink values and some blue values, but you don't have any genuine values.
But there is, I think sometimes we may be too self-critical, because the American society, whatever democracy you have in America, the greatest contribution to it, one of the greatest contributors to it, has been the Africans from Africans who were brought here, as slaves. Our people are the ones that struggle to make America live up to its ideals, and are still struggling. We need to really do more, but there's a great deal of achievement, I think, you know, because those people, I mean, the demand for freedom and civil rights and the civilization of America really was accomplished through the blood, sweat, and tears of and music and art and of our people who were here. One of the greatest challenges, in my view, is the what you were saying about the separation of something you said, it made me think of the fact that you have two forms of God in this country. You have the God of Sunday, you know, and then you have school, which is another temple. But we don't realize this. I mean, the pollution comes from the other temple. Much of the pollution comes from the hidden curriculum of school. Church, you go to church, but it's almost as if it's an afterthought, as if people are praying that in case there's heaven, when they get there, they can say, well, God, check, I was in church. But for 6 days in the week, you worship the God of chance, of competition, and then one day in the week you... So I think that what we need to do is to take hold of the curricula again. We need more local control of school, I think. It sounds like I am echoing some of the recent politics. But if you have a neighborhood that has a lot of, you know, people are getting shot on their way to school, then you cannot just regurgitate the curriculum from downtown because they don't have those kind of conditions. You need to take hold of your own education. So the more we can have an education that is really sensitive to the kinds of things we are saying, then those are those would be the way to go, I think, you know. But we should remember the great contributions of Africans to the society. This society will not be where it is today. The democracy will be
it would be non-existent.
No, without
but for all of that, I mean, how much, you know, when you consider the fact that the long experience on the planet of African people were brought to bear in the building of this nation, and you see that this nation cannot keep itself upright. It keeps getting into first one difficulty and then another one, despite the fact that it has had the best examples of how to live on the planet in its midst for all these hundreds of years. Somehow the lesson is still not learned. Somehow it's as though every night when you go to bed, there is somebody with a giant eraser and they erase everything that they have seen and learned from the contributions of American-born African people. And every morning you get up and there's a clean slate and you have to start all over again, trying to contribute something to keep this country from leaning to the left or to the right or falling down altogether. So, you know, it's almost a futile effort that you put in all of this. I mean, how many millions of slaves or captives are on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean that never made it here? How much sacrifice has to be made to make one tiny little country finally get it right and do it right? So I don't disagree that I think probably there may not be a culture had there not been people who had a culture that they brought remnants of and that they somehow managed to preserve parts of despite all the opposition. I really don't. But That is, I don't think that is our raison d'etre. I don't think African people came into being to come to travel from their land of birth to another place to build it so that everything in it can be kept in abeyance from them, and they have to spend their lives always struggling, always reaching, always trying to acquire something, and once acquiring it, trying to keep it. You know, I really don't think that's our mission. I don't think that's our purpose on the planet, is not to make this nation into a great nation, because we've spent a lot of time on that one.
Well, there's one of the challenges is the whole idea of the nation state. You know, once you carve the world up into little pieces, well, many of the countries in Africa, of course, that's one reason why Africa is still the way it is, because you carved it up into little pieces, and you call them nation states. You carve them up in your own interest, and so I think what I'm really trying to say is that, you know, you create nation states as if they have to compete with each other. You know, people say this is the greatest country in the world, this is the strongest. This is always comparison of always wanting to be the greatest and the strongest, and you know, which one always has to confirm. Every now and then you always have to go to war to prove, because if you were really, it's like saying that I am superior to you. Maybe a white person say they're superior. If you're really superior, then you don't have to prove it. But you always have to prove it, because it is not true. It is based on a false notion of reality, because nobody is greater than the other. A mosquito can fall you. We're in the world together. We only get strong by our joining of hands. Only by joining hands do we get stronger. So this is the one problem of always thinking that one has to, that you always have to be the greatest. The nation states are why make one law for the Americans? Why is there one set of laws that applies to the native, one set of laws that applies to the non-native? It's all life. You know, so long as these divisions are there, we are going to always be in competition with each other.
But why are we trying to make inanimate objects great? The education educing the humanity is making the people great. Making great people. Making life great. Keeping life great. Not making great roads and great buildings, you know, and great dams and great bridges, but great people.
Yes.
There were great people when the Europeans came here. They were living in wigwams and teepees and long houses.
Exactly.
They were great people. They did not need forts. They did not need sentinels standing at the top of fences with artillery to keep people away. So why do we need to put so much effort into materiality at the expense of spirituality? Materiality will be obsolete. Anything material will be obsolete almost from the moment it is created, because there's always a material thing that is superior to it that can be made. As soon as that comes into existence, you can see an improvement that can be made. So why would you get involved in trying to create a material world that is superior to your spiritual or human world? Because material things they become obsolete. They do not last.
This is something that is inevitable to happen also when you operate and function divorced of a living mythology. Now, Western people have defined mythology as being something that's just a lie and not true and all of that, but really there's no way that you can get deep into African spirituality without going through African mythology, because you see that it was through the mythos that the transcendent was communed with, that resonance came, because it was through the symbol and metaphor that you were carried over into that transcendental state of awareness of the divine as not being separate from yourself. Without that, then materiality becomes, in some sense, your God and what you serve. But in reflecting on African spirituality is one of the most popular myths. I'm sure I don't have time to go through the whole myth, but the myth of Asar and the resurrection of Asar. Ra being the Lord of the overworld, Asar being the Lord of the underworld, Heru is the Lord of this world. And we are supposed to be Heru through a process of educating the spirit within us, resurrecting Asar and becoming Heru. This was a part of African pedagogy, and reflecting on the fact that we are spiritual beings. Now, when you are not functioning and operating and operating out of the context of a mythology, and understanding that through myth and metaphors that you can now commune with the divine, because you cannot concretely see and think about the divine, but you can create symbols and metaphors that will point, and symbols actually transform your psychic energy. It evokes it. This is how we came into an understanding of these high wisdom spiritual teachings of the Per Im Heru through that process. But when you living among people who are divorced from mythology in its true sense of what it serves is as a purpose of helping you to transcend your consciousness to higher states of awareness, then your attention becomes directed to materiality, and the objects becomes of worship. Now we live in a world where we don't know anything if the technology is not telling us. You know, if a computer is not solving things from, we don't know how to look at the cosmos and see the arrangement of the cosmos and predict and know what is going on. This is something that African people were in tune with, just as they are in tune with walking on the earth. They knew major star constellations and what their connections were with our solar system. In fact, the Dogons knew that the star Sirius was the star that our solar system is revoluting around. Just as we have planets revolving around our sun as the center, the star Sirius is the center of the galaxies through which our solar system is revolving around. How did they come upon this knowledge? They had a system of knowing that is totally different from the Western way of knowing. And it also was embedded in their mythology, and they talk about Amma. So it's difficult to really touch on deeply what is African spirituality without going through the processes which helps to reveal what it is. Just as we learn in these, well, we're not really learning, but we're being trained in these Western systems, school systems, to think and reflect and look at things a certain way. Well, it really sets the parameters of what we're going to understand. And they're outside of the parameters so much that we can know. But because we're going through their ways of knowing, which is always objectified and material directed, then we limit ourselves and we can't see in this mystical sense. Not mystical as far as something being elusive, but mystical in being that is something that is more intrinsically the essence of reality, that is beyond the mundane, beyond just living in you get yours and I get mine in this individualized way, seeing ourselves as being one and operating and functioning out of that oneness. This happened in the Ma'atian years along the Nile Valley civilization when they built for eternity pyramids that still exist today with writings on it that are eternal truths, which all various forms of religions have borrowed from, making it their story. You would also find out that Heru, which is the Lord of this world, you will see that there are many different themes and motives that come out of his life that have been superimposed on the life of a so-called Jesus Christ, the virgin birth, the Son of God. All of these different things existed with Heru long before Christianity came on the scene. But the mythology has been concretized and historicized. So now people are looking for a historical figure to be their savior, not realizing that you are Heru. You are to be saving yourself from being ignorant. Salvation is moving away from ignorance and seeing the false as the false. And all of this happened through a pedagogical system that was configured through the dramatization of consciousness in the form of mythology.
I think the West too, this so-called worship of materiality and Western science, and the idea, the science we have today, does not have a very long past in the West too. For a long time, Westerners also saw the life in all things. If you remember, they talk about the period that they call the scientific revolution. Well, if you start with Martin Luther, you could think of Martin Luther challenging, and so gradually the West, because the materiality plays into the hands of the rulers. If you make a good gun or a good those things that sailors use,
telescope.
Well, some way of, if you can make
binoculars.
the ship, yes, you make the ship go better, then it plays into the hands of those who have the means to support your laboratory. So Western science played into the hands, of course, of the sponsors, military, governments, and before very long, the West too is a victim, I think, of at least not the rulers, but the average folks. They too are born into something that they never really thought about, and they too are being carried along by forces that they don't understand. But if you look at it, it's a long history. It's a gradual replacement, or the pushing of the spiritual into a room called a church. Something that you do only.
Room.
Yeah, something where you lock God up, and every Sunday you allow people to come and look at God. Or but this is very carefully managed. God becomes something special, not something. The shrine becomes something that is a house away from you. Instead of our Africans have shrines all over their house. It's part of our life. The religion is not something foreign. It's not something distant. It's always with us. It's part of.
It is personal.
It is always personal. We worship it all the time. When we eat, everything is life. So in all our activities. So I think what I am really saying, to me, in fact, instead of being discouraged, I see that there is a movement in the Western world too, towards spirituality, away from religion, more towards spirituality, which is an openness to the mystery of existence, in my view. And I see this in so-called New Age movements. I see this too in just the interest of people in so-called Eastern religion, so I am not. I am
discouraged.
No, not at all. In fact, I think this is a great time that you find this in the civil rights movement, people opposing things that seem that are implacable, that as if it can never be moved, yet people stopped the Vietnam War. The wars we are in today, again, you find a rise of opposition to them, and so I don't know. I am not discouraged at all.
Well, I'm not discouraged at all,
Yeah.
because, you know, when you started out with saying that, you know, where are you from? I am from God.
Yes.
If we understand that the source is not removed by that which follows the source. The source is the source. It is immutable. It will not be transcended. It is the source. And all things proceeding from the source are proceeding from the source. And without the source, they have no being. They have no possibility, no potential. So the fact is that, you know, eventually people will come to look, as you say, we don't know how to look at the cosmos. People will come to understand the need to look. People will come to understand the need not only to look at the cosmos, but to look for clarity and answers to things that at this point they don't have any clarity or answers for. Not to say that the mystery that is the unseen, the hidden, that which cannot be known with the mind, is going to be unraveled and somebody's going to recite that. But just the whole idea that it still exists. The source is still the source, and it will not be replaced by it.
Right, that's right. And you know, as the Western mind, when we use that term, it characterizes a certain way of thinking and looking at the world. There's an African worldview and there's a European worldview, and the European worldview and Western life go together, and they are not the same. Western, more linear thinking, objective, dichotomizing, analytical, and these ways of looking at and beginning an approach toward understanding something automatically put you at a pose to what it is you're trying to understand, and puts it and defines it as an other. African worldview does not do that. African worldview brings everything together.
Unites
to
oneness.
Right.
Thank you, Wayne Sebamurti.
Thank you.
Gentry. Thank you, Olasupo Laosebikan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being my guest today.
My pleasure.
I'm always just overjoyed.